Hello and welcome to this urban lunch talk organized by JPI Urban Europe. My name is Caroline Wrangsten and I'm an urban geographer. I work here at JPI Urban Europe and I will help facilitate today's dialogue. This is the 6th webinar that we have aired and where we explore transition pathways and urban dilemmas. Today you will meet with speakers that are part of JPI Urban Europe calls, but also other projects with valuable learnings from different areas and organizations. And this is because JPI Urban Europe is a hub for research and innovation. We are a platform to create, combine, discuss, and make knowledge and robust evidence both available and useful. Because, as many of you know, urban actors and policymakers constantly struggle with dilemmas. And this is why we have adopted a dilemma-driven approach to urban innovation. In our coming webinars, we will explore how learnings and capacity building of different kinds can approach these dilemma situations. Today, for example, we look into whether integrated approaches can help and how a variety of projects that try to improve something can work around certain issues and shape helpful synergies. And even though the concept of integrated urban development is not new, acting in silos is still common in many municipal administrations. And now we have global agendas that also encourage us to work with these integrated approaches to reach sustainability targets in time for year 2030. Having said that, let's see who have tuned in today and who are here. And we thought we'd launch a poll to ask you this question. And you should be able to see it on your screens. You simply tick the box, so to say, of what suits you the best. This is actually multiple choice. Maybe you're participating and you have many different roles that you're listening in with. So we will wait a few moments for you to make your choice. You can also tick other and maybe specify in the chat what is good. Let's see who we have here. All right, many who do not want to be put in a box, who ticked other. Please let us know in the chat how you define yourself right now. And a few researchers I saw as well. Very welcome to all of you, no matter what your role is. Let's do a second poll and ask a second question. And we're wondering where you are. Also very boxy, of course. But please tick where you are right now, what suits best. And this is single choice. And you can comment in the chat if you want to specify. Okay. Everyone ticked, and let's see. And there we go. We're all Europeans here today. Well, we are a European program, so maybe that is not so strange. Yeah, welcome to all of you. If you want to, you can type your city in the chat too, just to give it a try. Okay, great. Now we have already tried some participatory functions in this talk. And as you all know, the issues that urban areas and cities deal with today, they call for an integration of diverse knowledges and experiences. So please share yours during this webinar. You can give comments in the chat or ask questions in the Q&A. whenever you want to. You simply press the icon for what you would like to do. And if you experience any technical issues, you just let us know in the chat as well. All right, we are now going to meet with 4 very interesting speakers who will share different perspectives on how they make sense of and use integrated approaches in the urban field. So I think I would like to start with introducing Joe Ravitz. Let's see if we have Joe with us first. Yes, and Joe, you are the co-director of the Collaboratory for Urban Resilience and Energy at the Manchester Urban Institute, University of Manchester. And I, and many with me, would argue that you have somewhat pioneered the art of strategic thinking for sustainable cities and regions in areas like systems thinking and complexity science. And you have a background as an architect, planner, and development manager, as well as a creative graphic facilitator. You work also with the JPI Urban Europe funded project called the Looper Living Labs, which I think that everyone needs to check out because it's very interesting how you shape new models for experimental design and innovation at the urban level. So I would just like to ask you, Joe, to start with a few moments here. Why does today's topic interest you, and how do you understand this topic? Let's see. I don't think we can hear you, or I can't hear you. There you go. Yeah, okay. Please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here. And actually, I did email a bunch of slides right at the last moment. I don't know, can I share them from here? Is that possible? No,
I'm afraid not.
Okay. So maybe I'll do without slides. So you mentioned the Looper project. Yes, the Looper is called Learning Loops in the Built Environment. And we are trying to set up a lab in 3 cities around Europe, which brings to life new kinds of learning loop. Now, learning loop means many things, but in this context for city making, we are trying to make a more effective and active loop between the citizens and the stakeholders at the local level, and the problems that they face and the ideas that they might have, and then the actions which they can design and put into action. And then to go around that loop, not once, but maybe twice if possible. At the moment, local government, everybody knows it's in silos. Each department does not talk to the other ones. Things are very inefficient. You have to put your cross on the election paper, and then maybe 5 years later, it will go right through a huge machine and something will come back to your neighborhood. This is really not a good way to run a modern, the new dynamic, networked, complex, agile kind of city, which we need today. So you mentioned also the issues of urban transformation. And I think that is the overriding idea behind the JPI Urban Europe. And this is why I'm so interested in what you do. So for my part, I've tried to look at over a number of years, starting from the Rio Summit on Sustainable Development in 1992. We then said, oh, this is a great idea. Let's try to do this in a real city. And we found Manchester, where it was a good place to start. So we put together a large partnership of NGOs, businesses, policymakers, etc., and produced the Sustainable City Region Programme. And then as a book came out, a research centre was set up, I began to feel, I think we are missing something. And then I realised, yes, we are talking really about the sustainability of things, but this could only succeed or not on the way that people were thinking. organizations were learning and changing and innovating, and networks were responding and connecting and so on. So we began to talk about the sustainability of thinking and to devise ways to look for the synergies between, let's say, economic thinking, political thinking, social thinking, cultural thinking, environmental, and so on and so on. And as you say already, most of these things are disconnected. The biggest of them all is maybe climate change. Yes, people are doing, we are talking about climate change, but our cities continue to burn up the energy and have wasteful consumption and so on and so on. So this is not to criticize anyone, it's just to say the problem requires a way of thinking at these different levels, these different ways and systems of thinking, and then to look for connections between one and the other. And then if we can do that, not just in one city, which, as we know, cities are not one thing, they are not islands in a disconnected, they are very highly connected in economic and social and technology and so on and so on. So what we are now working on is really to say, yeah, let's try to really push methods that help us in this project of thinking and exploring and designing systems around the synergies. We began to frame this question as one of the collective intelligence of a city system. A political system could be very stupid and, you know, not efficient at all, and exclusive of anyone who is not in the loop, and so that's a stupid system. So what would a smarter or even a wise system look like? We can use technology to try and help us do this, but technology brings its own problems of exclusion and algorithms and so on and so on. So if we can begin to bring into some focus the idea and the system structure of a wise political system for a city, then we can start to understand, we can start to share with other cities who are thinking in a similar way. Now, this may take place, you know, through UN assemblies and world forums, may take place through grassroots initiatives and platforms and best practice examples. All of these things are needed. My guess is that the political system and the economy of cities in 20, 30 years from now could be very different. So it's very important to be quite agile in the mind, to be open to new possibilities, to use new media, not just to say, oh, we'll write an academic paper or we'll have a policy report. And that's the end, that is the final product. You know, a policy report is the beginning, not the end, in my view. So that is a brief overview of the way we're thinking, and it's great to be here and share these ideas.
Thank you very much, Joe. We will discuss this much more in a little bit. And I would now like to introduce your co-speaker, or one of your co-speakers, Marceline Bonneau. Let's see if you're with us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hello, I can hear you. Welcome, Marceline. I can't see you, but maybe soon. There you go. There you go.
No, it's fine.
Nice to see you. Yeah, Marceline, you work on linking theory and practice on sustainable and just cities on many levels in society. And you have worked with integrated governance processes amongst the EU cities. And now you're an Urbact program expert, as well as an Urban A fellow, which is funded by the European Commission. And Marceline, I am blown away from your very interesting projects, and I encourage everyone to check them out on the event site for this webinar. So having said that, Marceline, how do you understand today's topic? Why does it interest you?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this webinar. And I would like to thank Joe already to setting the scene and having also kind of very broader overview of the issue, which is very reflexive, and which also leads to one of my first points. I think what's really important is whenever we talk about integrated approaches, working beyond silos, it's really to start by creating a vision, but especially co-creating a vision. It's really a prerequisite to for any urban integrated strategies and for any of the ways we work in cities. So such a vision can be thematic, can be transversal, and this is really a paradigmatic shift that should be supported at different levels. So whether at the political level, that of elected representatives, but also at the level of civil servants and those really implementing the visions and then further on the strategies. It's really important to create those so that all relevant stakeholders are included. But by stakeholders, I mean all those concerned within the administration and also outside the administrations, with as much as possible varied profiles. So increasingly you see the administrations, people who don't have necessarily only a political science background or public policy background, but also for example, people from NGOs or psychologists or many others. And such a co-creation, such a methodology is really about sharing responsibilities while working horizontally within the city and for the city, at the same time as enabling solving these issues more efficiently and effectively. All this, bearing in mind all this, it's also that we have to see, I like what Joe said, looking at the future, you know, what's going to happen in 30 years. So it's really having long-term visions and going beyond short-term impact, but longer ones. Now, I can't see if you're sharing my slides, Caroline.
Yep,
and if you,
we can.
So I just wanted to share my first slides just to, so briefly, so that will be my second slide. I just wanted to briefly mention as concrete examples, and sorry, now I can't see what, yes, so can we just go to the second slide, please? Just sharing quickly the examples of Gdańsk and Sion. So in the city of Gdańsk in Poland, the 2030 strategy was co-created with all citizens, and this all started by co-creation of a vision, which led to 5 priority areas, which have then followed on some work on the strategy itself and then operational programs. And in Sion, it's a totally different approach, as this is a small city in France, whereby the vision is embedded by the citizens, a citizen list actually having the mayorship of the city. So bearing all this in mind, and if we can move to the next slide, please. I'm, amongst others, an URBACT expert, and I wanted to share with you briefly the URBACT methodology, which is all about integrated approach. So integrated in the sense of policy and sectorial approach, for example, focusing on what could be on environment, economy and society all being integrated in one. It also covers horizontal integration via the partnerships which are built to address local policies, vertical integrations with all levels of governance, territorial cooperation and integration of functional urban areas, as well as integration of hard and soft investment and infrastructures. I'm not going to give you all the information about the URBACT method, but what's really important is that it is all about the methodology. So co-creating these local strategies via the setup of ULG, urban local groups, composed of stakeholders, and many cities have their confined ULG and I would say wider range of stakeholders who actually jump in at very important moments of these processes. It's about, for many networks, creation of the setup of a local action plan and sharing amongst each other. So it's also the idea that integration should be taking place within the cities, but can also be shared with the cities, with other cities. And you also mentioned the importance of learning and exchange throughout the country, throughout Europe. And this is what urban networks are about. So it's really cities facing similar issues, exchanging amongst each other about their lessons learned, issues and solutions they've identified together in order to also capitalize on their experiences and to get trained. So what's really interesting about this approach is that it has a very strict canvas, but at the same time, the methodology itself is very flexible, and it raises many issues related to the new position, new roles, new skills and competencies needed for both civil servants as well as elected representatives, and the overall paradigmatic shift that is required to adopt such approaches. The two short examples I wanted to share with you are the examples of Brussels and Cluj. So just to show you that on the left side of the screen, you have the co-creation of the Good Food Strategy in Brussels, coming from sustainable food in urban communities, urban network. So this is a process which has really led actually to the creation of a vision with 250 participants, and then work on thematic priorities and priorities and operationalization of several axes, which are now the sustainable food strategy in Brussels, which is now being implemented. And on the pictures, you can see stakeholders from the civil society, from the private sector, from public authorities. And on the right-hand side, you have the example of both matchmaking and co-creation of local actions in Cluj-Napoca in Romania, about the temporary use of vacant spaces, which is another network, urban network named Refill. And very briefly to touch upon transversality and work above silos, beyond silos. This is also, as Joe has said, so I'm just going to rephrase it in different words, but it's really, it's increasingly important to work beyond the silos because of the reality in which we are, wicked issues, which are increasingly complex, which forces us to address both the theory and the reality. We're facing, we addressing issues of sustainable development, and these are all different approaches which are now trying to integrate more and more the work on the basis of project and across so as I said, different silos, and also bearing in mind the fact that society is overall transitioning, and we also need to integrate new ways of working. So it's really about working together, about taking a step back from what we're doing, to integrate global and systemic approaches, to go really in depth into the analysis of the project, the problems, and being able to altogether identify the roots of the projects in order then to better identify solutions, to combine expertise, which has to be pluridisciplinary and transdisciplinary, as well as adding up to with the methodology of co-construction. Just to share a few main questions this raises, which is about how to work within administrations with such an approach is when you're not used to be working in this way. What steps should be taken? How can you make people join the project? People who've never been able, who have never learned, I would say, who don't have the culture of working transversally and just don't know how to do that. The question of who's leading, who's coordinating, who plays which role in that. We mentioned the question of temporality, but also financing, how to communicate that to citizens, and what will be the immediate benefits. And just to share with you some very last examples, this would be my last slide, where I'm just going to briefly share with you the example of two cities in Belgium. The first one, which is Schaerbeek, in the region of Brussels capital, which is actually working on the basis of projects. So they really have a unit working on projects, coming up from the methodology of Agenda 21, and now strongly integrated into the management of European projects. So you can see the organigram, which was designed also especially to enable all departments to work together on these issues, which are identified together and then treated together. And finally, the city of Ghent, which has totally changed its strategy in order to be able to work. They have a specific unit which works transversally across all the departments to address strategically issues. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marceline. And I think we will have also Adrian with us, and you brought up, Marceline, some interesting questions. We can come back to them and see if your co-speakers have thought about them too. Adrian Hill should be here somewhere. Let's see here. Yeah, there you are. Adrian, you are a researcher, designer, and planner interested in participatory-oriented projects as well, and the governance and strategic communication, as well as local economies. This is broad and interesting. You have worked with everything from ecosystem management to mobility and urban manufacturing. And aside from being the coordinator of the very cool JPI Urban Europe project Cities of Making, you are the co-founder of the Osmos Network, which is a collaborator with the Latitude platform. And those of you who are interested in this, it's all on the event page to check it out. But I just want to ask you too, Adrian, briefly, what are your thoughts on this topic you're framing?
Hi, and thanks for inviting me to join this conversation. Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Marceline. I will try not to repeat what Joe and Marceline has already mentioned, because there's a lot of things which I would probably I would be saying myself had I started this conversation on my own. So thanks for warming up the show, Joe and Marceline. But something which we're talking about. The title is Partners, Project Partners to Synergy Soulmates. We're talking about relationships, particularly with, I would say, oriented, at least in my experience, oriented with the roles of public actors, private actors, and others, and how the collaboration actually works out. And I suppose without diving into the complexity, I'd like to perhaps share one particular way that we've been looking at this. The project Cities are Making is about urban manufacturing. Of course, urban manufacturing sounds very technical, question about what are making things in cities. But actually, when you dive into it, the topic itself is very much about values, vision. It's very much about people. It's about interests, and in fact, it's actually a very socially complex issue. So, as a case study, urban manufacturing is an interesting way of understanding how to deal with collaboration and in this kind of stakeholder type complexity. Caroline, is it possible to show the slides? I'm just going to share a few little ideas, because we don't have much time, and I think it would be nice to come out of this chat with at least a few concrete things. But the way that we've been looking at stakeholders in Cities of Making, and how I do it in my practice with Osmos, is by understanding 5 different types of stakeholder groups in terms of, and we look at that in terms of knowledge, business, public services, community, and capital. This helps us to at least understand what the kind of interests are, what the kind of interests in terms of how actors might be able to position themselves in terms of a project or a problem. I won't explain this diagram in great detail. If you're interested in more information, there's a description of this on the Osmos website. But basically, this is a starting point for understanding how relationships between actors could be built. And in practice, what we did, and if you roll to the next slide, is with the Cities Are Making project, we started to understand the complexity of urban manufacturing and what were the actors and the interests involved in it. We started to map out these actors, and every time we went to speak to someone, we brought along this map and we started building it up step by step and looking at the individual actors that and to try and find out where we could position them on the map. In some cases, an actor, for instance, in Cities Are Making has 3 case studies: Brussels, London, and Rotterdam. And there's a regional developer called CityDev, and CityDev in fact fits in 4 of these boxes. At different levels in each case. So we started to understand how these different actors in fact have very different interests even within their own organizations. If you roll to the next image, slide. And this is basically the final product, which in fact helped us to see how, what kind of roles these public actors might have. In some cases, what kind of roles all of the actors would have. And if we look specifically at some of the public actors, and I think we'll probably talk about that when Jocke speaks next after this, is that in some cases the public services actors have more of a facilitating role. In some cases, they have more of a kind of a driving role. And that, in terms of the topic of urban manufacturing, was very important to see how, whether they were the drivers. If we think of urban manufacturing as a collective benefit to society, it's how you deal with waste, how you deal with creating things, creating food, so on and so forth. How the public actors would position themselves in terms of this public good, and then to see what other kind of actors are actually taking the place of the collective good. So that was how we were mapping out these the complexity of the actors. Do I have another slide? I can't remember. There we go. And what we did. So of course, once you understand the landscape of the stakeholders and interest groups, it's a big question about how you actually deal with them. What we did with Cities Are Making is we came up with a very, I suppose you might say, a kind of a fun card game, which helped to create that conversation. Which, if we go back to what Joe was saying, the idea around the card game was that it would help to have a systemic approach to a very complex problem. And if we go back to what Marceline was saying, the cards were there to identify a vision and then to take a very transversal approach to an extremely complex problem. In practice, what we did with these cards is, over the course of various of more than 6 months of workshops, intensive workshops across the 6 cities, we developed these cards, and that became a language in which we could communicate this very complex topic to a range of different stakeholders within one single space. I'll leave it at that. I could talk longer, but perhaps we could.
Yes.
Thanks.
And we will talk longer.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And let's turn to Jocke. And let's see if you're with us. I think so.
Hello.
Yeah.
Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. I should see you soon too. And Jocke, I'm so jealous of you because you work as a transitioner, which I think is very suitable for today's talk. And you also have experience as former deputy mayor of the city of Genk in Belgium, which is very interesting to have in these type of talks, since you have worked up close with urban transformation, also from the inside, so to say. And I'm sure you have some good advice for city officials later on, since you have expertise in participatory policies here.
Thank you for having me, Caroline. Hi all. Nice hearing your stories and your thoughts. And I saw in the poll at the beginning that there are no city officials and politicians in this talk till now. So maybe I'm a former policymaker, but I'll try to look from that angle too, because I think it's also important. But maybe regarding, I'm going to keep it short, maybe regarding to the topic, it interests me a lot because integrated approaches and yeah, let's say cross-fertilization in cities is exactly the core of Utopia. And Utopia is the name I use when I work on making cities together through new alliances, let's say between civil society and policymakers. And for me, policymakers is of course a lot more than only local politicians, also civil servants, companies, entrepreneurs, and so on. So policymakers are people who with power, let's say, who can really push things forward. And starting from this idea of Utopia, I wanted to share with you two thoughts in this discussion, and I think Marcin already touched some of them, and Adrian too. So one is from my experience as a local policymaker, and we are talking here about sustainable synergy soulmates in cities. And I think, of course, when we're talking about cities, politicians are important, because good politicians can make good and a lot of change, of course, as well as active citizens, as well as an active group of citizens in cities. But I think that the role of civil servants is also very important, and maybe even more important than the one of the politicians. And I dare to say so because I'm an ex-one. So I really plead for let's say civil servant participation. Civil servant participation in a participatory policies practice. And I experimented a lot with this in Genk, in the city of Genk in Belgium, Genk with a K, the small city, 65,000 inhabitants. So this is also, of course, a very specific context of a smaller city. But I give you two examples what we did. For example, we set up a deliberative democracy process, a G360, in which we co-created as a city with the citizens the policy plan, the 6-year policy plan of the city of Genk. At the end, we were 450 citizens, so it was much more than 360. But we decided to train civil servants as facilitators. Adrian touched this topic. Thank you, Adrian, because I think it's very important. So civil servants not only as the experts, who all know, but the ones who leave their expertise a little bit at the side and to try to facilitate, and to really literally serve their citizens in the literal sense of the word. We had 43 people trained, and afterwards I really saw change also in how these civil servants worked as a civil servants, and it was a great experience for them too to be a facilitator. Another example is when we started up a big project, the development of the valley of a river that crosses 5 neighborhoods. So neighborhood development was involved, sports was involved, youth development was involved, of course, environment, mobility, public space. And what did we do to avoid the silos? Because we often face them in this kind of big project. What we did, we set up a simple bike tour of a day with all the people of the different departments to go into the field to this valley of this river. And at the same time, we worked at the relations between them to really co-create together on the field the first solutions and so on. So there are a lot of, it's two simple examples, of course, but there are a lot of possibilities to really work on civil servant participation, because we're always talking about citizens participation, but I think civil servant participation is something too. A second thought I wanted to share is more from a civil society perspective, because now I live in Marseille, I'm a city maker here, I'm not, everything is politics, of course, but I'm not into party politics anymore. So I work as a facilitator and as a city maker. And from this point of view, I think we must be aware that politicians and civil servants or administrators in cities are only a very, very small part of what a city is about. So we can't forget it. So the other ones are artists, are activists, are citizens, city makers, scientists, entrepreneurs, not to forget. So I think making a city is much more than politics and politicians. And I'm also convinced that the next big thing will be a lot of small things. So I think we have to do two things. Use what already exists in these local societies. I experienced that in the arts project, accelerating and rescaling transitions to sustainability, a European project Genk was part of. And we really try to find new strategies for this. So what exists already among citizens in local society, not necessarily within the city hall, how can we accelerate it and scale it up and do things with it? So that's one point. And my last point is that we really have to think about new alliances in cities. And I see a lot of great examples, and often it's also without the city or the politicians or civil servants. I think a nice example is Les Grands Voisins in Paris. That became really a reference, I think, in urban vitality and generosity, in creativity. It's a temporary occupation of a former hospital in the 14th arrondissement. My co-speakers will know it, I think. And it was transformed into a social, great value, a social project in which 600 homeless people were sheltered. And next to them, another 1,400 people lived there. 140 associations are involved. It became a real touristic hotspot. So this is a nice example in which the local authorities, the city of Paris, was just the one who made it possible to legally occupy it, because it was legally occupied. So there was some kind of deal with the city, but it's civil society who really shaped it. Associations, the architects, and so on. And this really changed this part of Paris. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share, these two thoughts.
Thank you, Joke. And yeah, it's easy to start to talk about different roles when you talk about these issues, because there are different roles involved. But hearing all this, maybe we can come back to Jo, for example. What are your reflections now, listening to your co-speakers here for a bit? What do you hear?
I'm happy to jump in. Sorry, I don't know if there is a round I didn't understand, or if I can. But...
Let's see, I cannot hear Jo right now. Maybe there? No? Now?
No, okay.
Now, yeah, thank you. Okay. Soon, Marceline.
So, all right, just a few comments. Let's say I was working on similar things from about 1985 as a community planner, social entrepreneur, and architect. And I asked myself, what have I learned in 30 years, actually? And a few things I have learned is to say, yeah, we cannot ignore the structures of the political economy, the ownership of the city, the conflicts between different forces. So yes, I have spent many times, you know, with local groups doing local neighborhood things, and we start a food co-op on some green space or something like this. And then some corporate supermarket comes in and says, oh, sorry, you know, we're going to use this site to have a supermarket. So you have to move. And the law and the banks are on their side. And not only that, the local people, the neighborhood, they say, yeah, actually, we want a supermarket. We want to go and buy our stuff in a basket and, you know, global food. So it's great to have these ideas, but then I ask myself, okay, how do we really get them into the structure of society and the structure of economy and the structure of finance, which, as we know, is very competitive. It is there are global forces which are very, very powerful. Another point which I have been through myself is to say, okay, we can have a neighborhood forum or a meeting, you know, program, active city making program, and let's talk about the neighborhood. And for many people, this is then a project on the physical environment, the streets, the trees, the facilities, the parking, all the physical details of urban life. However, from experience here, and I think it's similar at other places, we have then to fit this into the process of municipal planning and urban regeneration. And what we then find in some areas is to say, oh, the people have now got wise to this, and they say, oh, no, we do not want any trees, thank you, and any traffic calming, because if we do, the middle classes will move in, the place will be gentrified, and then the rents will go up, and we will be kicked out. You know, so this is another example of the physical, of the structural forces, which we then have to find ways to deal with. And the third problem, which I also have to look at, is the strategic level. So some of my work is about ecosystems with water and climate change. And if we look at a water system, well, yes, it's a very local thing. We can talk about this piece of water here. It's very beautiful. But we also have to talk about the whole of the river. It might be hundreds of kilometers around. Now, how do we get all the different local groups to coordinate and talk to each other across that much bigger area of strategy? Well, people have thought about this in the past and they say, oh, well, we need government. Government should do that. And it has experts in water and experts in land use planning and so on and so on. But then government has its own problems. Okay, so we have to look for ways to transform not just the bits of government which, you know, we can get the neighborhood people to neighborhood civil servants to our meeting, that's nice, and they can do things, but the bigger structures of government. And in my view, this is involving, this calls for a transformation. And I think, Marceline, you put up a slide with a organogram from one of your projects. And I was thinking, well, actually, not to criticize, but this looks like an organogram from, you know, old style government. Here you have your departments, and here you have the you know, levels of activity. And the big question is, actually, do we need a new kind of organogram, which is much more connected, where each part is speaking and learning from each other part? I think it might look different. So for my part, I try to draw these to experiment and test with policy people and so on and so on. One final point quickly is to say, well, one of my projects involves India, and I just came back yesterday from Chennai in South India. And as you know, India, the rate of urban expansion is many times faster than in Europe. In my view, Europe is fine. We have to talk about Europe, but actually most of the world is not so much like Europe. It's more like India. And rapid expansion, huge growth of real estate and huge informal economy. Half the people live on $2 per day, a level of poverty we cannot imagine, you and me. So then we say, oh, this city, it's a disaster waiting to happen. It's on the coast, the climate, the sea is rising, the rivers are flooding, the drought is, the groundwater is going down. How do we do this? Well, we have to take some strategic action for the ecosystems of the city. And this is what we're working on in some detail. However, then we find, the water, the canals, the rivers, the lakes, they are all surrounded by slums, by informal settlements who grow there. So the first thing is to say, oh, before we fix the water problem, we have to fix the slum problem. Well, that's a big agenda. And then we have to rethink how the city can expand into the future with a new kind of pattern of new livelihoods for the people who we might ask very kindly, politely, to just think about moving. We do not want to just dump them outside of the city in some new place. We want to grow organically a new form of city of, and this is 10 million people. It's not some small thing. Anyway, so I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks. Marceline, I'm sure you're bubbling with comments. You want to say something? And just to say to the rest of you, you will also have your 1 minute later to sum up, and stay around in the chat once we close the webinar to chat with what you didn't get to say. But Marceline, please.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So just to comment on the organigram, I think you're totally right. I mean, that's an organigram. What's important is what's written on it, which was obviously not readable. But this is I like your approach, which is a lot more innovative, but it is true that we also have to do it step by step. And for some municipalities, it's already just to have a specific department or unit which works transversally, which is affected, but works with the other departments. That's already the first step to it. And actually, the city of Schaerbeek is also working now on another URBAC network, which is public procurement. And their main issue is actually to set up collaboration with their partners within the administration. So at the moment, they're not so much even trying to co-create with citizens, private sector, or whoever else is interested. But that's really just to get to talk to their colleagues, which are in a close by office. So how do you do that? And we were exchanging on even small little things. So we didn't mention the bike tour, but even just, organize a nice meeting with nice food and nice drinks, and get into it, talk by the coffee machine and all of this. And that's also one of the main challenges of these changes within the administrations, when they enter via a set of people, via a unit, but then they have also to, I won't say invest invest the other departments. Going back to the training of of civil servants, I've just come back from an URBAC meeting. I was in Austin last week for that, and one of the major issue which came up, and now I realize it's there all the time. It was not so much working on the topic in itself, or having, I would say, difficult issues on a daily basis to work on integrated problems. It was really the difficulty to acquire the skills, adequate competencies and mindset in order to manage projects. I'm just going to mention two main issues which the cities were facing. The first one was the lack of risk management. So
maybe one main issue.
Okay, so risk management and the lack of planning in that regard. So just thinking, they wanted to do many things, but they had difficulties setting up steps, retro planning, and also envisaging that if something doesn't come out the way it should, what would happen next. And if I may just mention something very little on Grand Voisin, just to share, to fully agree with Joko, and what's very interesting in that case as well, the partnership with other structures, organizations, especially as in this case, it was the stakeholders who went to see the city council, who said, we have a plan, can we do that? And the city, the mayor, the city council of 14th district said, okay guys, you can just do it. So they really delegated this function, which is also an attitude that some cities and civil servants or elected representatives should have in some instances, not having the control all on everything, but being able to delegate when relevant.
Yeah, and that's and that's sort of back to the importance of having someone as a facilitator role also. Okay, this is so much fun and we all have so much to say. You can start preparing your 1 minute takeaways from what you've learned from each other or what you want to say finally. But let's just bring in our rapporteur to see if what he heard. And this is Jonas Bylund, who is my colleague here at JP Urban Europe. You're the Research and Innovation Officer. And I'm curious, Jonas, what did you hear during this talk?
Well, first of all, can you hear me? Great. So I heard a lot of things. And one thing that strikes me is perhaps how we now have perhaps naturalized integrated urban development, at least in how we think about and in projects that we run, although it's like everyone is still looking at, well, it's not common, it's not mainstream, but we're very used to think about it in these terms, at least. So that's very hopeful. Now, I had two things, and I'm not sure if it's possible to share that. I sent you two images at the webinar secretariat. Okay, you didn't get them. So one thing I was thinking a lot about during your talks or your infos was how would one say, how to visualize nowadays. We've been using a lot of text to talk about integrated urban development or the complex urban situations, but actually we're not really. I saw some analytical, like Adrian, your case, making cities of making. You've used that kind of an analytical way of trying to sort a bit in the complex issues. I've seen aspects of this, but I still realize it's very difficult to talk about this and showing images which are perhaps more direct than the kind of reports and texts that we do. So that's one thing that we're thinking a bit about at the moment. How do we depict, how do we draw, how do we just visualize this situation? It's very difficult at times. Now, a second thing was something that I was thinking about in terms of, let's say, transformation capacities that you've been touching upon, all of you, in different ways. But how do we do this in times of network fatigue? I've also heard some relations to that, or perhaps when public administration capacities seem, well, there might be a lot of will, there might be some actors, civil servants who are trained, but there is not the kind of organizational support, so to speak, in many public administrations. And Joki, you were onto that, but we've seen that in many places. That's also something that I'm wondering, how do we actually do integrated, and because this also touches upon the kind of learning that needs to be done that is not personal, in the sense that there's a risk when you have these types of persons who are very able to do this, and when they leave their jobs, perhaps as a planner, then the whole organization kind of loses a lot of capacity, and that's seems to be a huge risk. And I see that all around in Europe, as well as in other parts of the world, actually. Speaking of that, so that was my two kind of main thoughts, and I had two images to visualize a bit, but we'll leave it at that. So thanks.
Thank you, Jonas. We can share your images on the webpage.
Yes.
For those who are curious. All right, speakers, I'm gonna give you a maximum of 1 minute each. This is your challenge. for your final takeaways. I know Adrian might be in a rush to the airport, so I'm gonna let you go first. And then we do Marceline, Yoke, and Joe.
I think one of the biggest challenges I see is the role of the bridging actor, and I think all four of us talking here are in one way or another bridging actors, which are helping to facilitate dealing with problems and people and places. How you support a bridging actor is really critical, and then the question of who is the bridging actor? Is it a public actor? Is it an NGO? Is it a business? Of course, in every situation that's going to change, but I think that's the fundamental question: is how you find that person or the organization that can help the whole thing, help drive the process or deal with the challenge. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Marceline.
Actually, can you hear me? Yeah. Related to that, it's also the discussion we've been having about different levels of governance, of actors, stakeholders, but also of actions. As also Joe was talking a lot about the different strategic levels, systemic approaches and all this. And so really bearing in mind the actors and the actions. And in terms of facilitator and intermediaries, I'm a big supporter also having intermediaries internalized within the administration and not only relying on external facilitators who are extremely needed in many instances for their neutrality and skills and competencies, but these also need to be internalized within the administration so that people have this, the adequate skills, but also so that all that is taking place on the ground can actually fit directly into local policy making, and that you can directly basically go and talk to your colleagues in the other offices to say, you know, what's happening there, and this is what we should be doing in our city. Thanks.
Thank you. And Yoke?
Yeah, I agree with Marceline that the solutions can be very simple. Just step out of your room sometimes. So, and that's what I wanted to end with. I think new alliances are something we all have to look at and to be very creative in. And I see them everywhere. And I think we can learn a lot. New alliances between departments and cities, new alliances within the city, private civil alliances. I see a lot of creativity coming out from this. And I want to add one point to what Jonas was saying. I think the visualize things is very, very important, and it's not so easy, but I want to add that stories are also important, because I think the real knowledge and experience is out there, and there are a lot of stories to grasp. Also, how to become synergy soulmates. So I think next to the visualizing, also the stories to share, they are very important, I think.
Yeah, and Joe, do you have a final remark?
Final remark is to say yes. So many of the projects I work with, the administration is part of the problem. The administration, they are friendly with the corporates, the finance, the landowners, and they are part of a system which the local people, the people at the lower part of the system, they say, yeah, they are our enemies. We do not like them. So then they turn to other ways. Now, a creative way is to bypass the administration and do things with, you know, networks, Facebooks, and citizen-led action, which tries to get round the structural problems and faults of the administration. Another way is then, they vote for far right-wing parties. And if I could make one suggestion, for a future webinar, can we find somebody to represent a different point of view? I think all of us here are more or less the same point of view, but it would be actually very interesting to bring in somebody, you know, from AFD or from our Brexit party here and so on, to just really kind of, you know, put it up there and say, yeah, let's try to see if there is any common ground that we can all agree on. So I'll leave it there, thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, let's provoke to see if we find a common ground at one point. Good suggestions. Thank you very much to all of our speakers. You will find their contact information and their links on our webpage, as well as the recording of this webinar that you can share. If you would like to meet up also in real life, you're very welcome to join this year's Agora Stakeholder Involvement Platform on November 20th to 21st in Riga. You can read about this on our web. And we hope to see you on the next webinar, which is on October 18th. And then we will explore experimentation and ask ourselves, what are Urban Living Labs 2.0? What would that be? And the chat room will now stay open for 15 minutes. So keep talking if you wish or ask questions. Otherwise, I will say thank you and happy weekend.
Thank you.
Okay, goodbye.